Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview on where psychology started in China, the trials and tribulations that happened throughout, and where it is now. All right, so China was ruled by an imperial system from 1636 to 1911 in what was called the Qing dynasty. A lot of psychology at the time, or at least the concept of what psychology could be, was related to philosophers and philosophers' works. Confucius, Mencius, and other well-renowned philosophers in China during this age or before had created all these mind, body, and spirit ideas that were kind of laying the groundwork for where psychology would go. There wasn't a huge focus on education during this roughly 300-year period. So it wasn't until the Republic, which started in 1912, which ended the imperial dynasty, that education started to become a focus for China. In terms of translated works, the first psychology works that were translated into Chinese were Western texts, so they had come over by boat, and that was kind of the beginning, if you will, of where things started to take off. A couple other main points to mention are the May 4th movement, which I'll touch on later, but that was a big progression towards educational reform, which ironically I've got here underneath is Japan. Japan had an incredibly positive influence in a lot of different aspects of education, but specifically psychology to China. But later on, as World War I ended and Japan was still a major power and kind of had a big grip on China, there was a push to move them out of the picture and gain back that sense of national pride. So the first book that was translated was a psychology text titled Mental Philosophy, written by Joseph Haven. The book analyzed mental science and mental power, which are kind of the beginnings of what you would call scientific terms for psychology. Mental science, what are mental powers, and that kind of began the movement towards giving titles to those different terms. For instance, the book touched on memory, consciousness, reasoning, and other aspects that are related to the human mind. So that was kind of like China's first taste of psychology. What the study is, the scientific background, and it was seen as beneficial to the Chinese community, at least to the most part, because of the Buddhist texts that stated all utility is beneficial, and therefore it's not threatening that underlying structure of Chinese values. So because the Buddhist texts allow it, it was allowed to grow in the Chinese community. The first psychology department was formed in 1920, and not to get your timeline super messed up, but the first Japanese psychologist to lecture in China was in 1902. That wasn't when Japan had a big foothold in the educational department in China, but it was, the first instance that we have record of, and it kind of takes off from there. The first departments developed, but psychology had in theory been taught in schools and universities before. And this is all under the Japanese method, which includes a 21-year educational model, which meant you stay in school for 21 years, and that's the goal. And then another important quote from Blowers is, Japan forged links between psychology and education. And that is very important because they did have a lot of influence, but you will see over time how that influence slowly decayed. Oops. All right. So while Japan was extremely focused on influencing education in China, and the application to Buddhist works did work, we did see a decline in Japanese influence as China wanted to become more, I guess you could call it, nationally focused without the help of others. But at the same time, there was an influence in the United States' influence on the Chinese education system and other Western parties, which led to the May 4th movement in 1919, which was, I think it's, 1 year after World War II ended. And this was where Germany had lots of infrastructure and different things in China at the time because they had moved in, and the UN had delegated that that infrastructure would get reallocated to the Japanese because they were the big power in that area. They had the control, and so it, I guess, made sense to that committee to allow the big party in charge to receive that. But the Chinese were not happy with that, so there's a big student protest, which brought about this sense of nationality and brought about the sense of, we need to have an education system that matches those around us. Oops. Okay. The Psychological Society, which was founded in 1921, aimed to give psychology degrees more value. Previously, psychology was combined with education degrees, so if you did study education or you studied psychology, you would both have prerequisites for, you would have the same prerequisites for both degrees. And so Tang Yu at one of China's, actually it was, I guess, at China's most funded university, gave new value to psychology so that it was independent of education. The society was founded, a psychology journal ensued from that and did extremely well, publishing hundreds of articles all over China. And despite several armed disputes with Japan, there was an instance where the Japanese fired upon Shanghai. The country saw great growth in the educational department. The journals that the society was able to publish, touched on industrial and organizational psychology, social psychology, and educational psychology, which was new to a lot of people and very beneficial. In 1937 started the second Sino-Japanese War. The first one was towards the end of the 19th century, so 1894 to 5, I believe, which was a fight between China and Japan. Made a lot of the psychology related materials and people relocate because they were near the coast, and where Japan invaded, it all got pushed back into the mainland. So that hampered the activity that they could do and the progress that they could make. But from all the bad of the war comes a little good in the sense that the nation was focused on educational reform and they wanted a government that was strong and not corrupt. And so the spike in national psychology, which they called it, which was focused on educational psychology, and preventing corruption, was drastically increased. I don't know if you should use the word drastically, but it was increased in a good way. The Institute of Psychology was hampered by that war, but that relationship between politics and psychology remained. However, the government made the focus of that psychology research much more narrow than it previously was. So a couple questions to go over were, where would China be without Japan's influence? Would they be better off? Would they be way behind? There is a lot of good that did come from Japan helping out, but Japan did. I don't want to say they had their way with China in a sense, but they encroached on a lot of what China was doing at the time. Especially with the conflicts. But where would they be now? The second one would be: do you think educational psychology has helped prevent corruption in the Chinese government the way it was intended? They had, instituted a lot of focus on this type of psychology to prevent corruption, but do we see that working now, or is that sort of fallen off? And lastly, the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937 had a major impact on preventing a lot of research. So what other major things in the world today are standing in the way of that universal growth in the field of psychology? All right, thank you.